Let's bring in our guest, former Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs, Rick Stengel, who also happens to be former managing editor of Time magazine, and our friend, historian, presidential biographer, and Pulitzer Prize-winning author, Jon Meacham, comes back on the broadcast with us. Gentlemen, welcome back to both of you. John, I'll begin with you. Major Garrett is a good guy and a solid journalist and was not being facetious when he said, do we have to wait for the president's pronouncement? You and I have talked before about this president who lacks a baseline of history in the presidency that politicians with their eyes on this prize all their lives have. It's nobody's fault. He came from a different world. Is that also, does that translate into not knowing that there are certain rules, mores, and laws that sometimes govern your comments?
Well, President Trump is, like all of us to some extent, a prisoner of his own experience. This is a man who, it's been reported, actually pretended to be his own spokesman in the tabloid years in New York.
Yeah.
John Miller and John Barron. And so I think when the history of the Trump administration is written, there are going to be a couple of really important historical figures who are antecedents here. One is Roy Cohn, who was Joe McCarthy's lawyer and who tutored Trump in the art of changing the story, going for the headline, fighting wars in the tabloids. The other is Rupert Murdoch, who helped create that culture in the modern era in New York. And I think that essentially what we're seeing, and Rick has been in this position when he served the country, there is this, to use an old Watergate phrase, there is this enormous credibility gap. And just one parenthetical, President Trump has explained why he did it, but will that be the explanation tomorrow?
Right. And Rick, the reason why it's important to believe that podium and the person standing behind it is tomorrow's briefing, God forbid, may be about a U.S. military action we have taken overnight overseas. And we may have to detail the satellite evidence that led us to make that decision. It has to be believable, just as every word from that podium has to be believable.
Yes, but I would say that, with all due respect to Major Garrett, the question is a little bit disingenuous in the sense that nobody has the reality the way the president himself has the reality, whether he rearranges it or not. Every time you're up at that podium, you're trying to translate something that you know that's imperfect in a way that at least is plausible and truthful to the people sitting there. I mean, I think somebody mentioned Mike McCurry earlier.
That was me.
Yes, who I think has set the standard for best press secretary. But Mike had that great phrase. Someone said, well, what's your job? And he says, my job is to tell the truth, slowly.
That's right.
And so
Mike was adept at that.
And so some of that is because you know things that you can't say. How can you say things that you know that are truthful and be able to protect your boss, the president, and be able to protect the American people? And that's something when you're in government all the time, you have things that you just can't talk about, but you can't be untruthful either.
Jon Meacham, you have spent time with this president. In the life of presidents, the great thing about being a historian is most of the modern era presidents have had historians in because they're into your line of work and the books you've written, and they've read them and want to discuss them. Without sharing what you can't share about private time with this president, what traits have you reflected back on watching him these past just few days?
Well, I haven't, to be clear, I haven't spoken directly with President Trump, I think, since June or July of last year, so that should be clear. But I think what we see here is he is self-aware in this sense. When I ask him in that series of questions for Rick's alma mater for Time last summer, it was about were there analogous figures in his mind? Were there case studies in his mind about different presidents as he prepared for the presidency? And we ended up talking about Babe Ruth and Lydia Ko, the great Asian-American golfer, because Babe Ruth had been asked, according to Trump, by sports writers in the 30s, hey, Babe, how do you hit the long ball? And Ruth said, I don't know, I just swing at it. And Trump said, I just swing at it. And Lydia Ko had been asked what are her swing thoughts, and she said, I don't know, I just hit the ball. So he at least he was clear with us. There's no Lucy in the football here. He is a gut player. It's instinctive, and he is totally convinced that he can bully his way through almost any situation. And why wouldn't you believe that if you had his life experience and you were the president of the United States?
Only man who can quote Lydia Ko and Charles Schultz in the same paragraph with these. Rick
By the way,
Stengel?
you leave out the fact, I mean, despite John's long resume, that he was the editor of Newsweek magazine. You never
I don't
even
want to
mentioned
get
that.
into these petty competitions between you
no,
guys.
Our competition is over. I mean, we're pals.
We covered Thermopylae together. It was great.
Okay.
Give me 30 seconds on a great period for journalism, even if the paper form may not be what it used to be.
I think it is a great period of journalism now. I mean, there's a great topic to cover, but I think journalists also feel like they have a real mission now. I mean, there's a great challenge. The fact that you've been talking all night about you have a president who prevaricates by his very nature, that's a challenge to everybody in the Fifth Estate, and people are rising to that challenge, and I'm proud of them and rooting them on.
A starter reading list for book buyers watching tonight: buy Meacham's biography of George H.W. Bush, buy Stengel's biography of Nelson Mandela. You're going to have a great weekend. You'll be all set. We'll go over the next purchases the next time we have them both on. Gentlemen, thank you both very much for coming on tonight.